and who they're there for, and the rationale of why they get up every day to do their job. You know, sometimes you could lose in court to a judge just because he got up on the wrong side of the bed this morning. I mean, sometimes you can have an excellent case to be an excellent attorney and lose. Good cases are lost all the time. Bad cases are won. So it's very telling, I think, when the Supreme Court will not issue, after all the corruption is exposed, a fairly stern letter of warning that the United States Constitution controls the laws and the interpretation thereof of the highest court in the land, or the highest court that's actually ruled on that. And the Supreme Court takes issues that are not moot but are relevant today. But it's their definition of relevancy. And so therein lies the problem. So I would say that, you know, you did the right thing, and you had a reason for doing it, the right reason, and you were unfairly and wrongly denied. But again, that's my personal opinion.
Well,
I'm sure the Supreme Court judges would tell me differently. But that's
sure they wouldn't want you to give it, but...
No, I'm sure they wouldn't. But I have to tell you that my opinion is based on substantial skills, knowledge, and experience. And I was a law professor for 10 years. I taught business law, taught discrimination. You know, I was a trial litigator. I did discrimination cases. I know what I'm talking about. And then I was a judge. And if you read any of the legal research blogs on my case, they said, isn't it embarrassing that one of their own judges had to tell them what their own process was? I think the Wall Street Journal called it the most ironic case ever, that the EEOC was being sued for discrimination. It is ironic.
You brought up the Wall Street Journal, so let me ask a question. Part of what the movie's about is the fact that the mainstream media doesn't cover this stuff generally. Now, you were fortunate, you got coverage, but for example, I've been on this trip now for 100 and how many days is it? You know, almost 4 months, just under 4 months. So far, we've had the Elmira newspaper, the Wilkes-Barre newspaper, and some little small town in South Carolina. We've sent out probably 1 million news releases at this point by email and by fax, and nobody covers it. I was told point blank by the investigative reporter for the Atlanta Journal and Constitution that they're afraid of the judges.
It's a fair statement. You know, I would be fearful for you myself, because what you're doing, you've talked to people and you've exposed various weaknesses in the system that are certainly systemic and serial. And they're not, by no means, as I'm sure you know by now, rare. It's more the common practice today than it is the rarity. And that is the wake-up call that the public needs to see. And they have a stirring. What absolutely outrages and incenses me is that, you know, middle America lost their homes based on corrupt banks and holders of deeds by third parties who were basically robo-signers, and sold and resold loans. And people who, this was their lifeblood, their home, and they walked away. They simply walked away. Where is the enraged and outcensed consumer homeowner who says, this was my home, I raised my family, I made widgets for a living for 35 years, and I've lost the very thing that made America, America, the ability to own property? That's a constitutional right. And it incenses me that not more people were enraged if they lost their home. I wrote an article called Joe Lunchbucket's Grandson. And it was based on a cartoon character I saw on January 1 Wall Street Journal, the business section. And it's about a 6-month-old child sitting on a bunch of government reports with a smartphone in his hand and a briefcase next to him, screaming bloody murder. It says, I know, we have a problem. I know a problem when I see it. And he's going, wah, wah. I know, being born in this generation, in this time period. And you have to say that, you know, the kid is absolutely right. It's a mess. We're a mess. And we're not getting any better. If you look at, you know, the upcoming elections, which I will keep my mouth shut, I will just say that, you know, we're in a very sad state of affairs. You know, and This is my personal opinion, again, but I think it's a well-reasoned decision and opinion. And yes, I would be fearful for you and what you're doing. You're exposing people individually, you're exposing agencies, you're exposing businesses that have actually violated the law. They should be ashamed of themselves, but they aren't. Their lives will just be more outrageous and bold-faced to you than they ever were before, in your face, and they will be in your face.
I have a man who used to work for the government. I don't remember what capacity. He was, I can't remember what agency, but he was in their video for some agency in D.C. And he came and he asked me, he had his congressional testimony ready. He said he didn't prepare any. I said, oh, you didn't? He said, no, I'm going to read your story. He read me a story about some experiments with monkeys in a cage and a banana, and I won't go through the whole story. But
No.
the moral of the story was the only way you can change the behavior of people who learn a way to do something is to replace all the monkeys at once.
Yes.
Is that the only way we can solve our problems in America?
Well, you know what? I believe so. There are so many individuals that you can name that, I refer to them oftentimes, when it comes down to the masses that work for the government, is the silence of the lambs, because they slaughter them. They can't talk. They know they can't talk. They know that they can't come forward and say, I've been asked to dictate this letter, and I overheard the conversation in the hallway about how this person didn't deserve it. It doesn't matter. What matters is that they get rid of this person. And they do what it takes to get rid of them. If they have a weakness such as disability, you bet they will zero in right on that. And then we'll come after you with all they have. Everything they have.
Every person who would classify themselves as a whistleblower that I've interviewed has found that they didn't have any whistleblower protection at all.
Of course not. You have people, and people do what people do. They don't rise to the level of trying to do the right thing. People satisfy in life. They're okay getting a C. Where's the person that wants the A+, that wants to do the right thing? By themselves, by the company they work for, by co-workers, by their family. Look at all the dissension we have. And what people do to one another. It's vicious. It's horrible. And people, scream for relief and, to be able to do the right thing. And they shut them up. And the only way they know how to make their life a living hell. And they do.
Now, you're writing a book, is that correct? Can you tell us about that?
Yes, the book is called Judging Me. And it's about my life story from the time I was 3 years old and sexually abused until I was 13. And then I went to live with my grandparents and then in a foster home. And then I went off to college, to a women's college. I actually was in the convent. I got kicked out for smoking and drinking with the seminarians. But it's, my youth, my rallying for the Vietnam vets. It's about my relationships with men. It's about a lot of behavior that myself I regret. But it's about learning about myself and judging myself. I'm the only one qualified to do that. I stand in a very unique position. And it talks about, what I learned as a woman attorney, what I learned as an attorney, and my being made a federal judge. And unfortunately, it talks about, the triumph, being appointed as a federal judge is a real landmark in your life. So I didn't get there by campaign contributions or who I knew. I got there by my merit, by knowing the law, by teaching the law. And I had a judicial temperament that was based on the history of the law. And when you teach the law, you teach it in a way that discusses the fairness of it. I wasn't one of those Socratic kinds of teachers who, embarrass someone into shame and humility for not coming prepared to class that day. I actually taught the law, what the elements of a civil rights action were, and how to present one. Not how to talk out of both sides of your mouth. Not how to work for an insurance company and sell someone down the river. Tell them that their problems came up they're child rearing and not because their employer or someone did something to them that was a bad act, because of their own bias and discrimination. There's something called an equal opportunity discriminator, and he's out there, alive and well. You know, if you're not of the right color, right national origin, right sex, you know, you don't have prayer. There was a reason why we have the saying "going postal" in our post office. And my book talks about, you know, my struggles in life. I wasn't just the black robe or the black suit. I was a woman who was struggling with her own issues from childhood, who had worked through them, who came up the hard way, and who knows that the only right thing to do is to speak for the dispossessed, disenfranchised, and disillusioned. That's why we're here as public servants. And that's what I believe is true. And that's why I wrote this book. And it was to let people know that behind those black robes are real human beings. I want them to see that.
Can I have an autographed copy?
You may. Be my privilege.
Can you understand why some people have gone postal?
Absolutely. There is something, this is a well-researched opinion, and certainly I would have asked the Institute of, you know, Health and Science to look at, but there is something in the postal exam that incorporates a propensity for violence. And there's an intersection in the postal exam, I believe, where it is inclusive for people with a violent propensity and exclusive of those who are not. And somewhere there's an intersection, and the reason going postal became, you know, such a term of art is because there's something in the postal system. Also within the postal system, it was management by friend, corruption, you know, whose ass you kissed, excuse me, quote unquote. It's my own version. And it wasn't by education. There were no MBAs. There were no business majors. You know, these were people who were hard-headed discriminators, equal employment discriminators. And if you weren't of their particular race, national origin, religion, whatever, you know, you were not accepted amongst the rank and file, and certainly not into management. And they managed accordingly by their own discriminatory basis. So you could see why people were postal. They were included in the exam, that propensity for violence, and they were treated with demeaning, degrading disrespect that they snapped. They absolutely snapped. We all have a snapping point. I haven't gotten to mine yet, but I'm sure someday if they push me hard enough, I will. What that means is that I'll probably, instead of my judicial vocabulary, I'll bring out my truck driver vocabulary and give it to them. So that's what I can say as a real person. I've tried to be honest with you, and I have been.
You've been very honest. You are a little teeny bit younger than me, I think.
Just a teeny bit.
Just a teeny bit. You're 72. I graduated in 71 after spending. I was in the Army Reserve, so it took me a little longer to get out. Didn't get out in 4 years.
Neither did I, by the way. I had to work my way through college.
So when you were in grade school,
Mm-hmm.
you probably, like me, had drills where we'd get under our desks in case the Russians bombed.
That's right.
Did you ever, in your wildest thoughts, think that our own government would be a bigger danger than the Russians bombing us, as you thought when you were a elementary school student?
Absolutely not. I didn't think that I personally would be the focus of the government in terms of taking me out. Why? Because I speak honestly. You know, I told my mother about what happened to me as a child, and she smacked my face and just to turn the TV set up louder. We lived in a very poorly constructed home. But you can't smack my face as an adult to tell me to shut up, because I won't. And I will keep talking until someone does something about the corruption. So, I found my voice a long time ago. And I'll keep finding it. I'll find it for other people as well. It's who I am. I'm hardwired that way, for truth and fair play and justice. And you're not gonna change me. I'm 62 and I'm about to be changed.
Did you have 500 or 600 children so that we could get them all as judges?
No, I have 2 biological children, 2 that I call adopted children. And they were all wonderful, decent human beings who go out there and help other people, who have jobs, who pay their rent, and, you know, they've never asked their mother for money ever. As a matter of fact, since the government's come after me, they've had to help me out. Embarrassing, you know. But that's, you know, that's the way of the government. They interfere with the constitutional rights that you have. You know, who's going after the government anyway? Who watches the watchdog? No one.
I don't know if I can do anything with it, but I'm trying.
Well, good for you, because that's why you've had some people who have been resistant to come forward. Because this is not going to be pretty.
A lot of people are afraid, you know, they get.
It's my job,
second
they say.
thoughts, yeah.
And it's my job.
So you experienced the family court system as a child.
No, unfortunately, no one interceded on my behalf. I was left to die. Not for the grace of God. You know, I was not just violently sexually abused, I was bought and sold as a child into child sex. So, you know, you have to understand that my childhood was so horrific that had I not been a visionary, I couldn't remember something good in my past, but I had a vision of the future. I wanted to be a judge. At that time, I thought that all judges, that there wasn't a possibility that they would hurt a child. That's no longer true today. We have stories where judges have hurt children. And what at that time, you know, and I was a great fan of Perry Mason, where you got justice in an hour. And I thought that was the most righteous thing that I've ever seen. You know, I still watch crime dramas where the good guy wins in an hour. And that means a lot to me. So, certainly it's taken me 10 years for justice, so I'd like to see it in an hour.
Well, John, was it you who was commenting to me? Said,
Just on the way over here.
yeah, that said one of the worst things we've got in America is the TV show Law and Order, because people think that's the way it's supposed to be.
Well, you know what, I think people do see it, there's justice, but the unfortunate part is that there is no justice. You know, we see it on TV and we think that there is. But the reality is, all those who have sought justice and who have been denied, which unfortunately is 90-some-odd%, have the real experience of what it means to be persecuted and prosecuted for their beliefs.
Do you think that judges get bribed very often? I mean, I don't, this isn't about me, but it's a good example. People sued me, verified complaint, completely false, nothing in it was true, nothing.
Well, they just sign it without consequence.
They admitted in their depositions that it was completely false. And I was nothing but a defendant. I didn't have a countersuit because I'd never done business with these people. I had no
Right.
basis to countersuit. So 32-year federal judge, Arinda D. Evans, didn't actually find me in fault because there's only one cause of action and she didn't say I committed it, but she ordered me to pay $450,000 of their legal fees.
Oh my goodness,
After they admitted everything was false.
that's wrong.
There's only a couple options. Either she was bribed, had a relationship with a big law firm on the other side, or just decided she was going to rule against me and did. There was no legal or factual basis. Do you think they get bribed very often? Do you think money's in
Well,
it?
there are so many things that I think factor into it. Attorneys do appear before judges they play golf with, and there's very closely knit family. When I was an attorney, I came up before a judge and got sanctioned $1,000 for asking for the governor's phone records because I was told that no judicial appointments would be made if any law firm helped me on a very large political discrimination case in which my brother was murdered because I was the attorney of record. So it was a horrific case of political corruptness in the Republican Party, I'm afraid to say. And so my brother was murdered as a result to take me out. But I said, nothing will take me out. I will show up as long as I have a pen and paper. And I will proceed through this till justice is done. And I told the judge when he said, I find it unfortunate, Ms. Bullock, that your brother has been murdered. I said, I find it extremely odd that you should know about it. in so few of many hours as it's been since I found out. It begs the question of how they knew. This judge was also appointed by the Republican Party.
Why do the judges do what they do?
I can't tell you. I can only tell you why I do what I do. They're like any other craft. They have very base needs. And they're base. You know, they're not needs that people should concern themselves with, such as greed, or power, or sex. And I can't tell you what else goes into it, but there is, I'm sure, an equation, a mathematical one that you could use to figure this out. If I were a political scientist, I'm sure I would look on that equation, but I'm not.
Do you know much about the family court issues today?
I know some about them. I won't hold myself out as an expert.
Yeah, about half of the people that come and talk to me are family court victims. Sorry?
And I win appeals. I don't lose. So,
Well, we got about 300,000 people that would like to hire you.
under their own name.
Yeah, under their name, because you wouldn't want to, you have your license now? Or
No,
suspended?
I have to pay $25,000 to have a trial. 25 to 50,000, because I have to pay by the hour to defend me. Even though I have impeached every one of them, and have affidavits to attest to the fact that I never did what they're saying they do. They never even interviewed me. And the people that made the accusations have been caught in a lie. But do you think that the bar? No. Because John Sherlock, who's in charge of internal litigations, wrote that report and submitted it under the Office of Inspector General and signed off on it. And they came after me. Even a woman who sits on the board of the bar said to a friend of mine, "You know Judge Bullock, don't you?" She goes, "Yes, really well." She said, "Would you give her a message for me to watch her back for coming after her like she committed murder?" They are after her. They will strip her of everything just for speaking out.
I didn't have that on camera, but I probably should have. Turn it back on so we can keep talking. You want to tell that again?
Oh, I was just conveying to Mr. Windsor that when John Sherlock, Office of General Counsel for the EEOC, Internal Litigation Department, filed a complaint against me with the State Bar, he did it on Office of Inspector General paper, and he never interviewed me, and he interviewed people over which have eventually been impeached, and their lies have been shown to be lies. But still, I have to spend $25,000 to $50,000 for a trial to clear my name and get my license back, which is absolutely ludicrous. But because John Sherlock was so, I'm going to use the word mean-spirited, but actually I could say corrupt, and a person without a moral compass at all, came after me just to come after me and silence me. They know I'm a widow. They know that I don't have a livelihood outside of my practice of law. And so they didn't want me to be able to teach law, which you need a license to teach law, as well as practice law. And because I was a law professor, a business law professor, and taught discrimination, employment law, he took all of my ability to earn my livelihood away on a lie. An outrageous, bold-faced lie that I proved is a lie. And so today, as we talk, I've said, you know, my place is very humble. Now my son, kids have to help me out because they've taken my retirement monies away. Based on, and every person is different from OPM formula. There's no straightforward formula of how we figure out how we get our retirement. Although to tell you there is, but I'm telling you, numbers are very dicey. But from the State Bar, I had someone contact a friend of mine who sits on the board of the bar, which, you know, for me to come forward and tell you this is, you know, puts myself and her in jeopardy, but I know she would do the right thing. She contacted a friend of mine and said, I know you are familiar with Judge Bullock and know her very well. I need you to pass the message. Tell her to watch her back. They're coming after her like she committed murder. And they will not stop. And indeed they do. And to this very day, withhold something from me that I have a constitutional right to practice. I earned that law degree. So, you don't spend $250,000 on your education and not be able to practice it. Take your livelihood from me. It's wrong. It's basically wrong. Fundamentally wrong.
Is there anything else about the EEOC that we should discuss that we haven't covered?
Well, I've given you my viewpoint as a judge. I've given it to you as a complainant, as a plaintiff, that they lied clearly to a federal judge to keep me out of court. My case is 10 years old. I mean, do you know how hard it's been for me to get an attorney on retainer? I have a very good attorney, Gaston Beebe, and he's been with this and through this with me going into the 10th year. And I'll tell you, I have to say that he's a good sport because, any other attorney would have walked away. Said, this is just too much. But they've made it too much on purpose, in hopes that no one would represent me, in hopes that I would become ill. Luckily, I'm far enough away from them, and that, I had a spontaneous remission, but, I could come out of that any time or I could die, because I have progressive MS, MS terminal.
What's the No Fear Act?
The No Fear Act started out as something that made a great deal of sense. It was passed in 2002, and it said that if an employer, a government agency, retaliates against one of their employees, that they would have to pay for any court judgment out of their own office's yearly budget. So if the judge awarded $75,000 or $400,000, it would come out of that office's yearly operating budget. Well, what that did, although that sounds well and fine, you'd think that would make all the management and officials who work for that agency sit up and take notice of do not retaliate. Instead, what they did was sit up and take notice of what kind of outrageous lies they had to come up with to bluff their way through any retaliation charges. So they had to dirty the employee and make themselves look righteous in doing it. And that's where you get lies. And the more outrageous, the more believable, the more authority they take on. So I've given you my opinion as both a judge and a plaintiff, and as someone who helps people. I've had over 400 cases that have come to me to just review and look at in the last 4 years.
I was going to ask you earlier about the family court. Do you believe that it's the government's position to be able to take away a parent's parental rights? That's what's happening.
Well, I know that's happening. The basis of family law is to do best by the child. And they're not to be used as pawns. Not for the judge to use as pawns, and not for the parents. It's supposed to be about the welfare of the child, first and foremost. And then you get into the politics. So I have to say that it's the politics which control. Who knows whose attorney is sitting on the bench? Who contributes to what fund? And unfortunately, it's not who has the best argument or what is the best in the child's welfare. That's the bottom line, it's the child's welfare.
How was life for you in a foster home?
It was a private foster home, private placement, and I had a good foster family. It was scary, but it was, they were good people. And I'm very grateful that he took me in. They didn't have to. They had 5 children of their own.
It usually works the other way, it
It
seems.
certainly does, but they're not private placements. They're usually state placements or county. I was private. My grandparents were my salvation in taking me away from my father. They took me away, and they said 2 things you will never talk about. What happened to you as a child and money. Well, obviously I'm talking, so. So, I got past that one. Some good years of therapy.
Since you bring up talking about it, let's talk about the First Amendment for a second.
Okay.
If you could. Women are issued gag orders, and men too, I guess, but mainly, it seems I have more women come and talk to me. Maybe it's the beard. I'm not sure what it is, the gray hair or something.
It's the friendly face.
Issued gag orders, where they can't talk about what's happened in their case, where the court records are sealed. I have one sweet registered nurse who started a website to expose corruption in her county. She wasn't even involved in a case, but a judge found her in criminal contempt
For setting up a website.
for setting up a website. She wasn't even, they go out and get her, bring her in. And I guess they sentenced her, to 20 days or whatever in jail, forced her to take down her website. What's the Constitution, what's it supposed to mean? What rights should we have?
We have freedom of speech. And I don't know how she got in that position. I don't know if she appealed it or not. But that's her First Amendment right. People set up websites. Now, there's all kinds of protected property, intellectual laws that I don't want to get into that I don't feel I'm an expert on, and certainly wouldn't feel comfortable discussing in its entirety. But I will say that we have free speech. And that's why I can say what I've come forward to say. And it doesn't mean that I'm not going to be retaliated even more, grotesquely for. And I'm sure I will be. But the reality is that we do have the right to free speech. You have the right to set up that website. I don't know the consequences of that website. I don't know anything about the case. But certainly, at first blush, it doesn't seem to be fair. It seems to be inherently wrong. But again, I don't know anything about the case.
I asked you, and you gave me an answer about the family court situation and that politics control. But should a judge, one judge, have the right to make such life-altering decisions about people on the basis of hearsay? I mean, that's another thing with family court. It's all hearsay. It's social workers who may not even have degrees.
That's right. It is. It's about social workers who may not have degrees, who probably haven't even spent 5 minutes on that file. Probably looked at it right as they walked through that door and testified. And you haven't got a prayer. If it wasn't a level and fair playing field for you to begin with, then it's going to be slanted and it's going to be tilted, and that playing field will force one parent to lose rights and another parent to gain. Not that it's the right parent, it could be the wrong parent, but it's not a level and fair playing field. I will tell you that those social workers take those cases and basically have, a very short time. They give it swift review and they make a decision accordingly. They're so overloaded. I'm not trying to make an excuse for them, I'm just telling you the fact. And that's why when we have legal representation by the state, when they appoint an attorney in criminal courts, those attorneys come in, on the fly. And that's why you have people enter into pleas of guilty when they're not guilty. They don't have a prayer. They don't have an attorney who's got really a basic interest in defending them. And it's not until you get an attorney up there who will actually speak. I've represented children in criminal courts, and it's a horrific thing to see a child called a train wreck. I had asked the judge, I said, in all due respect, Your Honor, what do you mean by my client is a train wreck waiting to happen? I didn't think we'd even gotten to the guilty or not guilty part yet. This is in the beginning, in the motions. And you're taking this, what I tried to do is a fair playing field, and you're trying to level it. you're trying to make your witnesses, have more credibility than mine. And when did you get to make that call? Who made you judge, jury, and executioner here? Because you're not.
We're making various recommendations to the state legislatures about laws that would reform the legal system. One of them is that every court proceeding of any type should be recorded, and that the parties should have the right to record on their own.
Right.
Don't you think that would clean it up a little bit?
Well, definitely ex parte conversations, which are against the law, unless you're talking about substance. So I'll give you an example. In my case, they had to get a judge outside the EOC. It was an attorney that they made judge for my case. And they're not to have had ex parte conversations, but they did. The agency continually talked to this particular judge. So she was predisposed to dislike me, and they selected her particularly as somebody who disliked the very look of me, who would think that, the fact that I didn't drive, at that time I couldn't afford an energy car, I used a gas car. But she, looked at the car I drove as a gas guzzler, and, looked, to me because, I believed in appropriate trial attire and not flip-flops to wear into court. That, that was, that because I believed in a proper trial attire, that made me, somebody who was more concerned with proprietary rather than substance. She was very wrong. But it's how the agency slanted her view. And then she told me in her decision that I was losing my job, and I said, "Oh, I'm glad you're the first to know, because I didn't know anything about it." So, and that's the kind of thing that comes out and is blatantly against the law. They can't talk to the judges outside, not unless it's about procedure. They're not supposed to have an inside influence, and that's what you're talking about. Social workers should only be given so many cases where they can spend time. Like classrooms have so many kids. It's just basic realities. You need more money in the states to make more attorneys available, give them more time to represent people. Appoint attorneys. It's almost unheard of to appoint an attorney in a civil rights matter. They say you have the right to, but I'd like to see it happen. I saw it once in the appellate level, but that's it. On a very important appellate matter. But you very rarely see that happen. And that's somebody's civil rights. That's just as important as somebody's criminal rights. You're not taking away their life, and you're not taking away their liberty, but you're taking away their livelihood. And it diminishes their family. It diminishes them in ways that you can't even begin to count. So it's not a fair system, but it needs to be fair.
I've had people tell me that, well, let me ask you without you telling them what I've had people tell me. Do you feel that we have very many people in prison who are wrongfully convicted?
Absolutely. I think I just referred to the fact that people they plead guilty when they're innocent just because they haven't got a prayer. And they know it. And so, you have people in the prison system who shouldn't be there. But because we're not about rehabilitating, we're about simply warehousing criminals, you make them a criminal. They have to survive in that environment. And, survival is by no means easy in a criminal environment. Unfortunately, I know way too much about that, because I've represented people in cases where there's been criminal convictions, and although none of my clients have been convicted, I interview people who have been convicted.
You indicated that there's bonuses paid in the EOC for making cases disappear.
Go away.
Would you suspect that the EOC may not be an exception to the rule? Do you think it happens in other agencies?
Oh, I know it happens in other agencies. I know it happens because I have people call me all across the country with cases that are employed by different agencies. I see the same threats to take away their license when they're CPAs and they just happen to have a license to practice law, and they filed a discrimination complaint, and their judge for the EEOC hasn't been licensed to practice law, and they're asking, how can you render a decision when you're not even licensed? So it's agency-wide. After the No Fear Act, it was agency-wide. Because each agency did not want to have money come out of their budget, their operating budget. Now, what will happen if they find in my favor for $250,000? They're going to have to take that from the Los Angeles district office's functioning budget for the year, their supplies. Well, frankly, I don't care if they have to bring their own pen and paper to work, or if they have to bring their own stamps, or their own pencils. I really do not care. Because what they did to me for over 10 years, to threaten my life, and to cause my illness to become terminal, when in the beginning it was remission and relapsing kind of MS, I have to say I don't care. And I don't.
You commented about foreclosure and the loss of homes earlier.
Right.
And you talked about robo-signing.
Right.
Can you talk about that just a little bit more? That's another of the, that's about 10% of the people we talk to.
Well, I'm just speaking for homeowners who have lost their homes. I'm enraged. There was also a settlement that was reached in the dark of night behind, closed doors and smoke mirrors, where they were going to get $2,000 each. Well, the state's taking that money anyway. But I wrote on my blog, I said, you know what, this is the most outrageous thing I've ever heard of. And that if they send you that check, that you should sign it under protest and say they owe you the rest. That you cashed it under protest. And that's just chump change for what they lost. What are they supposed to buy with $2,000? A car? No. Wash and dryer for what? They don't have a place to put it. What are they supposed to do with that money? So, it was an embarrassment by our legislators, by our Congress. I can't even speak to that. It embarrasses me that our lawmakers would do that. Sorry for the noise.
That's right, the bailout money.
Yeah, the bailout money. Well, the banks are carrying everything at the cost of the stated cost rather than what it's really worth. So the banks get more bailout money. If they would redo their books at what it's really worth, then you would see the profits they're making.
You're a grandma?
Yes.
The big challenge with the movie and with the trying to get something done in America to make it better is to educate people that don't have a clue.
Mm-hmm.
You're a judge, retired judge, you're attorney for many years, you work for the Bar Association, but more important perhaps, you're a mother and a grandmother.
That's right.
Can you talk to the people out there that don't have a clue? And somehow, how can we get through to them? What can you say that might get through to people? You've got more credibility than just about anybody that we're interviewing, so what can you give us?
Oh, I thank you, Mr. Windsor, but all I can say is that for the United States of America, that each of its citizens needs to step back and look at the American life. We love our lifestyle, we take our privileges for granted, and we look at our government to take care of us, and we look at government agencies to function properly and publicly with our interests in mind, and I'm telling you, they do not have your interest at heart. You will not get treated fairly. You will not come out the winner. Because more often than not, they will not give you the time of day, nor your case. It's a sad reality. Just go onto something like Undercover Lawyers Forum, and you'll see people every day in their jobs, how they've been screwed over, and continuing to be, because they come out and they speak about what's happened to them. And employers go on that site as well, to look for these employees who have taken on, different acronyms or monikers or whatever, so they don't reveal their true self. I write as myself, but they don't. They're afraid to. They're afraid their employer will see it, because employers are very savvy about the social networking. They actually go out and purposely try and catch people talking about what's happened to them at work, and then punish them even more. So I have to say to the public that it's time to wake up. It's time for Americans to say, what about my friends who lost their home? Did you quickly, summarily dismiss their ability to manage their funds when maybe you didn't really look at the whole picture? My book, Judging Me, talks a lot about that. I can't judge another person. No one can. We do not know about the mysteries that lay in the hearts of other people, and we never will. We can't go there. All we can do is embrace other people and try and understand it and walk in their shoes. And not dismiss them because we think they didn't manage their money or their household budget or they bought too high or they, took a gamble on their house. I mean, I don't think any one of us has the right to be able to do that to another person. We do have the humility and the kindness to embrace them and understand that if we walked in their shoes, maybe we would understand what happened to them and why they are where they are today. That's all we can do.
And I think that really applies to family court, where people figure, oh, if they took their children away, then they've got to be bad.
Well, that's the connotation that's given when your child is taken from you. They almost stamped your soul, seared it into your heart that you are a bad person, bad parent, bad human being. When that's not the case.
Well, we need to get you cured of what you have so that we can have you as our next Chief Justice once we clean up all this stuff.
And I'd like to see America where people had a fair chance. They had a chance for justice. Like I said, Perry Mason was my favorite show as a child growing up, Justice in an Hour. But I'm telling you, I'm going into the 10th year of my lawsuit and there has not been any justice. Except with the Ninth Circuit. I mean, that decision made it, for all federal employees, more due process rights. They cannot keep people out of court like they tried to keep me out.
Would you mind if I let each person who's here on the crew see if any of them have a question?
No, not at all.
All right. Vivian, you want to be put on the spot first? Walter?
I wanted to ask you about kickbacks to judges from Social Security. I've heard rumors of that. Is it true that there's a slush fund?
Well, there's a slush fund for judges, actually. It's through judicial council organizations where people donate, and it's my understanding that it gets parceled out accordingly. I am not aware of that particular fund. I've not been a state judge, not been in the federal process where you go through either being nominated or campaign contributions. Because that's how let's face it, that's how our federal judges are appointed, it's your campaign contributions, not whether or not it's meritorious. I mean, you could be a really bad judge, and there's really bad judges out there, but you gave a very large campaign contribution, so you got your judgeship.
I see. ABX 2-11 makes it basically impossible to charge certain judges in Los Angeles County with criminal conduct. Are you aware of that?
I am aware of that. I'm aware of the fact that, in terms of prosecutors in the criminal justice system, that they can withhold mitigating evidence. And that is a Supreme Court decision, and that speaks volumes.
So that should be against the law. What is against the law, what they did?
No, it's not against the law.
It's not
anymore.
against the law.
Not anymore.
Because of ABX 2-11.
Well, I don't know if it's because of that, but the Supreme Court actually came out and said prosecutors can withhold mitigating information that would mitigate a criminal's time spent or how he spent his time, or whether he spent any time at all. Maybe he's not even guilty. But they can withhold that kind of information and not be held accountable. And that is outrageous.
Yeah, it is. What is your blog?
Oh, my blog is, I believe it's Bullock versus EEOC at spotblog.com. Spotblog, S-B-O-T.
Oh, Blogspot?
Blogspot.com. I think that's probably how you have to put it in the computer.
Okay, EEOC. I got it. Is it too painful for you to say some more about your brother?
Well, it's very painful to know that he was murdered for just because I was the prosecuting attorney on the case, that I was bringing it civilly against a lot of very important Republicans.
What was his name?
Edward. And there was another murder that same day. Someone who worked in the government, who was the director of a particular agency. He had documents which he was gonna bring forward. He was electrocuted in his pool in Point Loma.
What was Edward's last name?
You know what, these are names that because of a FBI investigation, and I was a cooperating witness, I can't give out. But, I will tell you that there were 2 murders involved. And that it was, I mean, outrageous. Who knocks people off these days?
What would be the point of it?
What is the point of it? They wanted to shut me up. They thought if I had a indirect or direct death in my family by murdering my brother, that I would withdraw, because I was already a widow and death had already visited my doorstep. I had MS. It was the remitting, relapsing. It was the, if you're going to have MS, it was the easy kind to have. But the reality is MS is never easy. And they thought that it would weaken me. It just made me angrier. So I said I would show up so long as I had a pen and paper. So don't count me down and out.
Is it possible to tell me the date of this situation?
Oh, this was, oh gosh, I think it was in 97 and 98. It could have been earlier. It's in the 90s.
Well, I just want to say that I really admire you for your tenacity and for hanging in there. And I have similar stories. I've had murder in my family, and the U.S. Navy tried to kill me before I retired. So
I am so sorry.
I understand. I left the Navy after 25 years with no certificate of appreciation or anything else. It's because I found 2 senior officers having sex with young women, and I refused to back down. So
Good for you.
they tried to kill me. They sent me on combat mission after combat mission after combat mission after combat mission, and I survived. President Clinton got me out of the Navy in 2001. It took a presidential act to let me retire.
Unbelievable. I mean, I believe it because I've seen them come after me. Like I said, I don't see any hitmen in the budget, but you know what? It could come under what they call consulting.
T&E.
Consulting.
So I'm going to help you with your book, but I also have
Thank
a
you.
doctor that I'm going to pass to you, John Jimenez. He's a holistic health practitioner. I'm a cancer survivor.
Oh, thank you.
Recovered from cancer holistically, so I'm going to pass this information on to you for
Thank you very
whatever
much.
that might do to help you.
Oh, thank you. I'm sure it will help me a great deal. I appreciate that.
I have one quick question.
Quick question?
Yes.
All right, we'll take a few more minutes.
Okay. Why do they give each case 10 to 15 minutes and then go to the next? Do the judges ever go over the files before they can make decisions?
Well, they're supposed to go over it the night before at least, rather than the morning of. And yes, they do quickly review it, but I can say that not all judges are so cavalier. There really are good judges out there that do take the time to read it. And I can say the judge that I was originally assigned to, the reason my case was alive was that he read the horrific things that happened. Unfortunately, I had a law clerk who didn't research the law very well, and he took the law clerk's research and made it his decision. And that's what the Ninth Circuit Court overturned.
It's interesting you say that. My son has a friend in Austin who is a clerk for a federal, I'm not sure if it's appellate judge or
A federal judge.
a federal judge, either district or
Right.
appellate. And he says that he's the one that makes the decisions in the
It is. I
cases.
just told you that it's the law clerk, and that's a student. And what they don't quite understand, they haven't been out in the real world yet to understand enough to go back to the legislation and read the initial words of Congress when they passed this. Why did they pass this law? And all the history to date. You have to have that. You can't just research the last appellate ruling or Supreme Court ruling. The Supreme Court ruling holds the highest law of the land. But actually, we have the Senate that, the President can come back and change that. So it's important to understand that they have a lot more cases than they really should be handling. Which is why, back to your question of why they sometimes take 10 or 15 minutes and give it short shrift and look very cavalier about deciding on it. Whereas other judges do take it home and spend long hours at night going over the caseload the next day. I can tell you that they do.
Should judges be held accountable? Should immunity be eliminated or modified?
No, I think accountability is definitely. Everyone has to be accountable. Because when you lose accountability, then you open them to the baser human needs of greed, graft, corruption. I mean, if you didn't make it a law that people have to wear seatbelts, they wouldn't wear them. Why? Because, you know, it takes that extra second to fasten yourself in. You know, we had to make it a law. Why? Because people basically are lazy. You know, they're not going to fasten their seatbelt unless they make it a law and a $350 fine. So, I mean, ergo, we need to make judges accountable. You need to make everybody accountable. You can't have people satisfied and get a C in life. These people, especially judges, have to be held accountable. They hold higher positions, more power, more specialized power.
Do you believe it would be beneficial if we made the model rules of professional conduct for attorneys laws and the code of judicial conduct for judges laws?
They're supposed to be laws. They, you know, that's what they come back after you as. You know, if you violated the model rules. Those are model rules. That is our conduct. But you gotta remember that it depends on who the prosecuting attorney is for the state bar, or who the judicial person is that looks over judicial conduct, whether or not there's any political favors involved in that. It's all politics. And if you're not politically connected, you know, you're gonna find yourself in for a long, hard battle.
Is it realistic for lawyers to police lawyers and judges to police
Absolutely
judges?
not. Absolutely not. You need more of something that they devised, panels to review police actions, people from the community, you know, a wide variety of people, not just attorneys over attorneys. That's a very close-knit, almost secret society, you know. They have their own agenda, and people within that particular society have their own agenda. There's those who control from the top down, and that's what they do.
I have a question.
So go ahead.
You know what, I think you have shown such tremendous courage and you are tremendously inspiring.
Oh, thank you.
I would like to know who your role models are, or were when you were growing up.
I really didn't have any role models. My grandparents, my grandfather he had a PhD from Harvard. He taught economics at Marion and Williams College, and he taught in Miami Beach. But my grandmother was also Vassar and Radcliffe graduate and had an MBA, and she wrote dirty stories for what was then tintillating romances back then. But she is the reason why bacon has the plastic on the back, because she said, if I have to make my husband one more BLT that's all fat, I'm going to scream. I went to Congress, and she's the reason there's plastic on the back of bacon. I think I got my spirit from them. So.
Well, you know, as a follow-up to that question, who are some of the people in the public eye, either in politics or government or otherwise in the public eye, who you...
Well, Rosa Parks I left, and she's dead. I can't name anybody today who's alive. Sorry.
Only dead people. Yeah, well...
I thought Rosa Parks was wonderful. But you gotta remember, Rosa said, you know, I didn't mean to be part of civil rights. I just wanted to sit in the front. My feet were tired. I wanted to sit down. You know, but you know what? She is a woman that I admire. Martin Luther King Jr., Kennedy. These are my heroes. These are people who actually said something and made a difference. You know, and if I had a dinner party, I would invite them. And you do. And everybody here.
Thank you. Well, you know, I've told, John's heard this story before. I have a granddaughter. I'm not going to mention her name because her parents are scared to death about what I'm doing, but I have two granddaughters, and I drive carpool for one of them. And I have since she was in preschool. She's now in the 4th grade. And I told her when I started carpool when she was in preschool, I said, this is going to be more than transportation. This is going to be a learning experience.
It definitely was, I'm sure.
And so I wanted to always, you know, I wanted to ask her about class, and she just started rebelling when it got to be multiplication tables. For some reason, that was taking it too far for her grandmother. But in the 1st grade, I picked her up one day and I said, Madison, well, what'd you learn in school today? She said, well, we studied Martin Luther King. I'm going, in the 1st grade? Are you kidding me? You know, in first grade, we were learning what? Apple is, a picture
That's
of an
right.
apple is an A, and
Oh, bless her heart.
a ball is a B. And they're studying Martin Luther King, and
How wonderful.
she immediately says to me, she says, "Grandpa, what was it like back then?"
Oh, wow.
And I said, "Well, it wasn't very nice."
No, it
I
was
said,
not a
very-
nice.
You and I were in, a couple years apart. You were one of those sophomore girls I was after when I was a senior.
Well, actually, I was not well sought out at school. I was very poor, had 2 dresses, and a bad case of acne. And really, I was laughed at. I was incredibly bright. People tried to cheat off me, but that was all that I remember of high school.
Well, I told her, I said it wasn't very good.
No, it
She
wasn't very
said-
good.
She said, "Well, Grandpa, what'd you do about it?" I said, "Well, I didn't really do anything."
I
about
marched.
it." I said, "You marched?" I said, "I wasn't ever prejudiced." But I said, my parents weren't. They just didn't have a prejudice bone in their body. And she said, "Well, when I grow up, I'm going to do something about things like that."
Wonderful. But
So
see,
that's
you were
why I
born
s-
without prejudice. See, just
Yeah.
the way I was. You take people for who they are. I mean, there's no prejudgment in the first 5 minutes. You don't sum a person up, if you will. You take them as they are, and that's how we
I've
are.
always, like you have always been for the underdog.
Right.
But when my granddaughter doesn't understand why I'm doing this, she knows I'm doing it. But when I took her aside, we had a party before I left because of all the things I was missing, birthday parties,
Oh.
anniversary, and now my birthday. And I took her, kind of put her in a little headlock, and I said, "Madison, I know you don't know why I'm going to be gone for so long, but I want you to know I'm doing something."
Martin Luther King would indeed be proud of
Yeah,
what you're
answer the
doing.
question.
Yeah, she immediately knew it. When I called after I'd been gone for a couple of weeks, and they're so excited to talk to me, and she said, "Grandpa, I know you're doing something." So every time I
You
talk
are.
to her, I say, "Hey, Madison, I'm doing what's the matter?" Say,
Well, you let her hear that I told her that you are
I'm
doing
doing
something.
We gotta do something.
We have to. We have to.
Nobody else. It's just you,
No,
you
if-
and me and some others. We
Right,
gotta do something.
Right, and I would love to crawl into the covers and pull the covers over my head and say, I can't deal. But you know what, I don't have a choice. What are my choices? And if they come after me, a judge, what are they gonna do? They come after the people who know less than I do? Who don't have the voice that I do? I have an absolute responsibility to come forward and say what I know the law to be and how the law should be. I mean, it would be irresponsible. I have certain attributes that God has given me that I have the responsibility to use and to use for others and myself.
Well, John, you've been hanging around me for a couple of weeks off and on. What would you like to ask?
I have family members who work for the CIA and the FBI.
Mhm.
I have a good friend I've known since 1972 who's an assistant director of the FBI.
Uh-huh.
Can I trust those people, in your opinion? Is there any institution in this country that we can trust?
The answer is no.
I was afraid you'd say that. And that's such a basic thing to me that I can't trust my own nephews and nieces.
I'm not saying you
because now
can't
they're-
trust them personally.
Well,
I'm saying work-wise, no.
Well, and that's my point, is that they're part of the problem because they're a member of this institution.
Well, they're higher up too.
Yeah. well,
And
that's-
somebody else commands them. They don't get to, if people had, and could make their own decisions and not have there be a domino effect, they would do that, but they can't. They don't have that ability.
Well, this is, the way I have described this in email to the powers that be in Placer County is that corruption, like that Brown stuff that we all know rolls downhill.
Right, right.
And corruption
Absolutely.
never rolls uphill.
No, corruption comes down. It is, the agency's head set the way, the policy. You gotta remember, there's the politics of a job, and then there's the handbook. The handbook doesn't mean a thing. It gets dusty. It says we're the equal opportunity employer. Well, you know what? Guess what? That doesn't count. What counts is the politics, the day in, day out behavior of people. That's what counts. That's what the courts are supposed to look like. When you look at a behavior of an agency, you look what they do day in and day out. That's what they do. That's who they are.
One more question. Next year will be the 50th anniversary of the landmark Gideon v. Wainwright decision
Mhm.
that supposedly guaranteed all of us citizens a right to an attorney if we're unable to afford one. Yeah,
right.
I'm a victim of a law firm in this state that has outsourced the public defender function in 8 counties in California. And this man advertises himself as the Sam Walton of the legal profession.
Oh.
So if you could just talk about the 50 years that we're now going to celebrate next year.
We're gonna celebrate? I don't
Well-
know if we're gonna celebrate or not. I think we're gonna say how sad it is today that we have the kind of criminal attorneys who take the money and don't do a thing. Don't even show up for motions. They take the money and run. I'm afraid that's very true.
Let me ask you this, following up, related to that. I researched every federal case in Georgia involving a pro se plaintiff for 32 years. For every active federal judge, either at the district court or appellate court level. Guess how many pro se plaintiffs won?
Well, I'm afraid it's less than 1%. 0.
There was only one who won, but it was uncontested. The other
Oh,
side
they didn't show?
didn't respond.
Oh.
They didn't even answer the suit. I'm sure the judge had to bite his lip while awarding it to the person.
Well, they have to do that, you know. Not at the administrative level. Administrative level, the judge has an obligation and responsibility to see that justice is done. Now, it doesn't happen. Doesn't even get out there to be a hearing. You know, it gets summarily dismissed. But the reality is they're supposed to do that.
We have a right to represent ourselves, but we just have the right, we unfortunately then have the right to lose.
Well, the problem is that as pro se, I'm different because I'm a member of the legal community. But typically as a pro se complainant, people can't afford to hire a lawyer. And so they end up representing themselves and they don't know the ropes. They don't understand what summary judgment is. They don't understand how to present a case to show that material facts to the dispute are in question, and that those can only be resolved by a jury, the jury of their peers. They're entitled to their day in court. I'm entitled to mine. Should I have to wait 10 years? The answer is hell no.
Grand juries were created to keep the government honest. And
Yep.
there's a power of indictment and a power of presentment, which has been pretty much wiped out because of no criminal procedures anymore to deal with presentments. However, some courts do it, or some grand juries still exercise that power occasionally.
Mm-hmm.
We could clear up a lot of problems in our country if we just had the rights to go to a grand jury and let some citizens investigate and take some action.
Well, it doesn't work that way. The grand jury will indict a bologna sandwich.
Yeah.
And the grand jury is the setup. You know, the defendant doesn't really get to go in there. I mean, they do it indicting a bologna sandwich. If the prosecutor tells them so, they will. And that's the bottom line. That's why grand juries are, the whole setup is, you know, it's set up for people to be prosecuted and persecuted. It's not set up the other way. They're not given all the information. The grand jury can't make a reasonable decision. And even if they could, would they? With the prosecutor down their neck? I don't think so.
I interviewed a woman from Chile the other day. And she, every time she spoke about the prosecutor, and she didn't do this intentionally, she called him the persecutor. The
Well,
persecutor.
prosecutor and persecutor. Well, bless her heart, I think she's got it right. She felt persecuted and he was the prosecutor. So, bless her heart, I think she's got it right on. It was a Freudian slip, but it works.
Yeah, she didn't have to say 2 words, she just got it all out in one.
Yeah, bless her heart. Yeah.
What can I do? What can I do? Tell me what I can do.
You're doing everything, Mr. Windsor. You're showing what other people will be afraid to come forward and talk outside of maybe their own spouse. They would definitely wouldn't talk to your neighbor about their problems at work. They're embarrassed or humiliated. They don't want to lose their job. They're the ones that type up the nasty grams that they know are not true and correct. And yet they will do it because they're, but for the grace of God, they're them.
1225th Street.
So, you're doing everything that can be done. You're doing more than anybody else would do. And your life will be in jeopardy because of it.